What I fear is not being discussed is the ways in which artificial intelligence allows certain things to be done cheaper and at scale. Rather than looking at what happens between you and me if it is used, what happens if it's used by 1 billion people.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and on today's show, I'm taking stock of the state of the world in 2023. Be warned, no sugar shall be coating said thoughts. Then I'll bring you a fascinating conversation with sociologist Zeynep Tufekci about the one thing everyone is overlooking in the AI conversation. But first, for years, I've been warning that our GZERO world, a lack of global leadership and the geopolitical conflict that grows as a consequence, was gathering speed, and that acceleration is only increasing today. While channels of international cooperation, multinational institutions, traditional alliances, global supply chains, they're all losing their ability to absorb shock. And today, when I speak of war, I've got to specify which war I'm talking about. Is it the war in Ukraine that's remaking the security architecture of Europe? Or is it the war in Gaza that's destabilizing the Middle East and threatening global religious conflict? Or is it the war that Americans are fighting against other Americans? Let's start with the war that no one seems to want to talk about anymore. At the end of last year, Russia controlled about 20% of Ukraine's territory. 12 months later, almost nothing has changed. Ukraine's counteroffensive, which is done for the winter, moved the front line less than 25 kilometers. And that pesky Prigozhin notwithstanding, now that he's no longer standing, Putin's strategic position has markedly improved. And the Kremlin is no doubt encouraged that Republicans increasingly do not want to spend money on Ukraine. That will be even more true when Donald Trump very likely secures the Republican nomination. Ukrainian President Zelensky, rather than Putin, now faces increased pressure to move to a negotiated settlement. Next to the Middle East, where 1,200 Israelis, the vast majority civilians, were slaughtered by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, and where tens of thousands of Palestinians, the majority civilians, have been slaughtered by Israeli airstrikes. We are no closer to resolution today than we were when the fighting began. And with Iranian-backed Hezbollah looming on Israel's northern border, not to mention other proxies across the region, one thing is clear: there are no strong guardrails on this conflict. And finally, to America's political dysfunction, because even though the economy is doing well, the political system is in crisis. Earlier this year, personal rivalries among Republican lawmakers in the House left them without a speaker, and therefore unable to pass any legislation for the first time in 160 years. And for many of us, 2024 is kind of like Voldemort. It's the year we really don't want to talk about, but it's coming. And this time next year, we'll hopefully be preparing to inaugurate one of the oldest and most unpopular presidents in history. Whether that will be Biden or Trump, of course, it's too soon to say. Look, I don't mean to be all grinchy. There's plenty of good news to chase the bad. U.S.-China relations are more stable than they have been over the last few years. India is a politically stable democracy, and it's emerging as a crucial bridge between the global South on one hand and U.S., Japan, and Europe on the other. The EU is politically stronger than ever, and Mexico is poised to enter a period of strong economic growth. And then there's the explosion of artificial intelligence, poised to reshape the world, for good, maybe for bad. For a new perspective on that much discussed topic, here's my conversation with sociologist Zeynep Tufekci. We filmed it when we were both in France for the Paris Peace Forum. Zeynep Tufekci, so good to see you.
Thank you.
Artificial intelligence, big topic right now. Tell me what most concerns you about the way it's being discussed by those that matter.
What I fear is not being discussed is the ways in which artificial intelligence will be used because it allows certain things to be done cheaper and at scale. I think there's a lot of emphasis and discussion on things like what they call artificial general intelligence, things like whether AI will one day be smarter than an average human being. Now,
the existential risks.
Well,
that are
not even
out
that.
There,
no, so that not even that, because whether or not AI becoming smarter brings existential risk, that's the other question. But whether or not AI becomes even smarter than humans on any one domain, I mean, it's an interesting question. There are, things to think about that, but, there are a lot of things that other creatures or calculators already do better than human beings, and that's not really the key pivot around which society changes. The key pivot is whether AI enables things that were otherwise difficult or too expensive or too onerous to do at scale
cheaply
by corporations and by governments, and whether it brings new ways of inferring, controlling, manipulating, making decisions once again at scale. So rather than trying to sort of see, does this pass the bar exam? Well, okay, whatever. Like, that's an interesting question. We should look at things like, well, if we start using this system to try to decide who gets benefits or some other legal question, like, it doesn't have to have passed the bar exam or not for it to be deployed at scale to do that. I'm not even saying it would be bad for it to be deployed at scale, but what's not happening is that, rather than looking at what happens between you and me if it is used, what I would like to see discussed is what happens if it's used by 1 billion people, because that's a different question.
Give us a way that AI might prove to be potentially transformative at scale that we truly have not anticipated adequately.
Okay, so I will give you an example from hiring. There's a lot of evidence that hiring historically has been biased. People hire people like them, people hire from their alumni networks disproportionately, which seems like a positive, but if you're not in those networks, it's like a problem. There are racial biases, there are gender biases, so we know all of that. So there's a great push to use more automated systems to do hiring to help with the human biases, which I'm there, right? This is good. And people have discovered that, when you train it on the human data, it kind of picks up some of those human biases, sure. Fine. But you know what? It might even be easier to fix than humans, right? Because if humans are biased, sometimes convincing them is harder. So I'm even with AI, at least we can deliberately say, oh, we detected a bias and use it as an opportunity to correct it. And we could end up with, more diverse workforce. So sounds great, right? So here's an example of the kind of problem we could be facing. Computational systems, AI systems, have been shown to be able to infer things, which means they can kind of deduce from your data things that we as a human being could not. For example, they have been used.
Facebook, for example, showing that people are gay when otherwise they wouldn't be able to necessarily know.
People have been, people prone to chronic depression, people with compulsive gambling problems, people who might be prone to getting pregnant in the next year before they're either pregnant or depressed or any of that, or people who are introverted, or people, there's all these sort of not obvious in a job interview things that once it sort of looks at all your data, it could infer. For example, we use AI to hire. We kind of fix the gender race bias by deliberately intervening. We know already humans do it. Everything looks great. We got, racial diversity, we got gender, we got everything looks great. And then we discover everybody prone to the chronic depression has been weeded out by the computer without us even knowing that's what it was doing, because we asked it to match our existing workforce or existing high producers or whoever we had. Or we had a lot of, very aggressive, unpleasant people, and we just said, match this. It just matched this.
Because regulations as they stand
would not match
that because you wouldn't even know that you're discriminating.
And in fact, before AI, it wasn't really possible to do this at scale, right? You couldn't just, you might have said, I am going to eliminate everybody prone to chronic depression, which would not be a good thing, which would be a terrible society if we did that, but you couldn't really infer from just a job interview, whereas we know from, scientific studies, just people's Instagram posts, the AI can infer that, and it's not something easy because they take the same things, and if you show it to people, people can't eyeball it. So it's not something as simple as, they're posting gray colors or they're posting, sort of
No, they're
despair.
underlying patterns
There
that
is
come from crunching
something-
massive data.
There are something
Yeah.
it's detecting. Like, for example, can AI weed out people who might be prone to unionizing? The ones who will be whistleblowers, the ones these sound science fiction-y until you start reading the literature and you're like, wait, it can do all of this. And whether or not it can do this 100%, or whether or not it can do this better than a person doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because if it can do it 80% of the time and it just costs 10 cents,
Then you're going to use it.
They're going to use
They're
it.
gonna
Whereas
use it.
in the past, if you wanted to find the potential whistleblowers or union organizers, you had to spend $10,000 investigating each person. You're not going to use it. So I think lowering of price, expanding of capacity at the hands of the powerful is really an underrated risk and much more likely to happen compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger coming down the corridor, from the future, right?
So that's one.
yeah.
That's a fascinating kind of risk, and I really like the example. Now, let me ask you about a different kind of risk. What about the risks that come from deployment of AI tools in the hands of billions of people?
So, depends. Just like the internet, there are lots of things you can think that are positive once people have more access to information, once people have more access to, I like the translation capacities. I grew up not speaking English, so the idea that, people around the world can now use translation tools to read papers, things, that sounds great to me. On the other hand, let's say we deploy facial recognition at a mass scale. So all of a sudden, you can go around with a camera and get people's names immediately and then connect it to other data about them. That's genuinely scary, because if you lose completely the right to be anonymous in public in a way that would empower people to stalk, harass, follow, just make you feel self-conscious, none of that is good. And
Is that becoming inevitable?
no, of course not. Of course not. See, this is the thing. It is not inevitable, because I think what is inevitable is that there will be technology to do facial recognition. Because the technology is not that complicated. What we're calling AI right now, especially machine learning models, the science behind it has been around since World War II. It's not very complicated. What changed is that the method needed data to eat, right? It didn't have a lot of data, so it didn't work. What changed is the big data. And once you have the big data, it will happen. It'll be doable, and others will do it. So we can't really say, it's not like nuclear weapons where you can try to gatekeep, say, enrich uranium and certain things.
The tech is going to be there. It's
yes,
going to be
but there are a lot of technologies that is there that we just don't allow. We just say you cannot put facial recognition software on phones. You cannot have facial recognition databases. You cannot do that. We can easily regulate and say that. And people say, well, can we really do that? And I'm like, yes, we can. I mean, just look at how many things we can't put into food. You cannot put heavy metals into food. You cannot put, you cannot use certain kinds of things in paint, heavy metals, lead. There are things you cannot put in the air. It keeps the public safe. And I feel like that's the job of a regulator. There are things that, if unchecked, could be used widely to lower prices of products or to do something. We just say no, because as a society, that's not a price worth paying. I would make facial recognition, for example, one of those things.
So let's close with something positive. In terms of the direction of regulation so far,
yes.
What's the thing you've seen, or what's the actor around the world that you've seen that gives you greatest cause for hope?
So the greatest cause for hope I have is how many are trying to act. So we had the executive order in the United States. We have other sort of processes. Do I like any one of those as they are? They have pluses. There's a lot of good things about them.
I don't mean, I'm not asking holistically. I'm asking for something, in other words, a piece of the regs that you think I think they're getting this piece of AI right, or they're on track to get this piece right.
I'm going to take inspiration now from the corporate process, is that they don't really sort of try to prejudge what's good. What they do is they iterate. They throw something out there. So I'm really hopeful and feel great about the thing that everybody's trying to get something out there than any one piece of it. Like, I don't think there's any one piece of it that stands out to me as like, that's going to get it under control. But the fact that everybody's rushing to get something out there, and they seem to understand that you can't just like throw it out there and then sleep on it, because you have to throw it out there and then see how it works. Because I don't think any of us are in a position with like crystal balls to say, this is exactly what's going to happen, and just regulate the models. Or I don't think any of that is going to, like, I don't even presume like I or anyone has that vision. But so many governments rushing before the window closes, because I was talking to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern last week by
former New Zealand PM. We've
yes,
had on the show. Yes.
And she had the Christchurch call after the Christchurch massacre.
And immediately, it was done within
So I
days.
talked to her about what she had learned, and one of the things she said, which is very true, is that it is hard to retrofit guardrails, because what companies do is they create facts on the ground, and then they say, we have facts on the ground and we make money, and then governments become reluctant because they're making money, even though they're not aligned with democracy or human values. So I think this time there's a real political will to not let corporate-driven facts on the ground run the show. Well, it's always hard to, regulate complex things, but the fact that there's so much understanding that we're going to try, and we're going to be there as the representative of the people, and if we don't get it right, we will try again, is a lot more hopeful to me than any one of the regulations that I'm kind of like, okay, let's try this, let's do something.
Zeynep Tufekci, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you've seen, or even if you didn't, but 2024 is just around the corner, whole new year, GZERO. We're going to take a moment, sign up for our most excellent daily newsletter, appropriately titled GZERO Daily.